Kevin Freeman, what do you do for a living?
I'm a money manager, investment management.
Why are you writing books about security?
In 2008, when the stock market started to collapse, my clients were losing money and I wanted to understand why. So I started digging into it. I found evidence of financial terrorism in the 2008 collapse. I shared it with friends who were connected to the Pentagon and the FBI, and the next thing I knew, I was a government contractor doing research, which came out in 2009, found unequivocally there were evidence of foreign terrorism, financial terrorism, as a part of the stock market crash.
And that resulted in your first book.
The first book, which came out in 2012, titled Secret Weapon.
And what's the thesis of this book?
Basically, when we were doing all sorts of crazy things in our housing bubble and so forth, enemies of the United States, particularly radical Islam, elements in the PLA, elements in Russia, noticed our vulnerability economically, and they started using George Soros style techniques to target Lehman Brothers, AIG, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, and they actually started using manipulative techniques in the markets with the intent of crashing our stock market. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. In fact, Hank Paulson, former Treasury Secretary, even came out and said in his memoirs, he said the Russians approached the Chinese and said, if we dump all our holdings of American debt now, we can crater the American economy. And in fact, the Russians did, the Chinese did not, but the Russians did, and it worsened our economic situation substantially.
You've got a follow-up, game plan, how to protect yourself from the coming cyber economic attack.
Well, as a part of my research, I not only did what happened in 2008, 2009, but I got into the Chinese doctrine, which was written in a book called Unrestricted Warfare, published by the People's Liberation Army of China. 2 senior colonels in the PLA wrote this in 1999, and they said the best way to beat America is a single man-made stock market crash, cyber attacks on the infrastructure, or ruining the currency. So I not only looked at what happened in 2008, 2009, but I looked forward to what could happen. And what I found was the next type of war that we will face, it's not going to be a shooting war, it's not going to be guns and tanks and aircraft carriers, it will be cyber economic in nature. This is what all of our enemies have said, because they don't want to take on the military head-to-head now. They've said, we will crash the American economy if we get into a war. Now that's not just conjecture, that's what Vladimir Putin said just recently when he invaded the Ukraine and we said, we'll slap sanctions on you. His response was, you don't want to do that because I can crash your stock market. I can hack your financial systems. I can dump the dollar. The very things that I wrote about in 2008 and then covered in Game Plan. Game Plan then says, okay, if that's what they intend to do, what would you as an individual American, how should you protect yourself? Where do you save? Do you invest? Do you put everything in gold? Do you buy silver? What do you do with your money? And that's the game plan.
As a money manager today, are you in the stock market?
I am. And in fact, the stock market in a currency collapse performs pretty well. I have with me that I carry Zimbabwe currency. That is from 1998, Zimbabwe was producing $100 bills that you could exchange at Thomas Cook for a $20 US. Now flip it over, that's what they were producing in 2008. Their currency collapsed, those were $100 trillion bills not worth 1 penny. But despite the fact their currency completely collapsed, their stock market actually did pretty well. It was the best performing stock market in 2008. So I cover this in the book. If a currency collapse happens, you don't want to avoid stocks. If a deflation happens, you want bonds. So the question is, what kind of economic attack would we be facing? What are they going to do? And how should you respond? And that's why it's called game plan. The plan is, you look at the offense and say, well, they're going to pass. And if they're going to pass, then you want to pass defense. If they're going to run, you want to run defense. So we cover all types of economic attacks and all types of investments and how you respond.
Right now, what kind of defense do we have up against such an economic attack?
Unfortunately, we don't have anything at the national level. General Keith Alexander, outgoing head of the NSA, has said recently, in fact he was on 60 Minutes, And he said, basically our enemies know how to crater our financial system and there's nothing we can do to stop it at this point. We can't stop hackers from hacking Target. We can't stop rogue employees from stealing secrets from the NSA. Iran has hacked the Navy websites. We can't totally prevent this. So it's a very complex topic. It's the new form of warfare, and that's why Putin was so confident in saying, if you do this, we can crater your market, we can attack your system. So there's very little we can do as a federal level. We're trying, we're improving. I've been working with several groups in the government that are trying to figure out solutions to the problems. But in general, game plan tells the individual, imagine you were living in Honolulu in 1941 and somebody said, hey, by the way, if the Japanese start bombing, here's what you should do. That's the nature of this book. If the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Chinese start attacking us economically, game plan tells you how to respond.
What's one piece of advice you have for individuals?
One piece, everyone in the financial system says, go electronic. We'll give you $50 if you'll take electronic statements. Don't do it. Or if you do it, print out actual statements. Give you a personal life experience example. In 2001, when the trade towers were hit, I had a line of credit in one of the companies that was housed in those towers, and I accessed that to pay payroll because all the money dried up in 2001. The banks didn't know what to do. I had to go with my paper statement and convince JP Morgan Chase, at the time it was Bank One, to let me have access to that line of credit when all the records were down. If I hadn't had the paper statements, I couldn't have done it. That is one thing. Keep copies of your stock brokerage statements, your bank accounts, and so forth, because if the whole system is down for a week or 10 days or 14 days, how do you pay your mortgage? How do you pay your bills? That's one solid individual piece of advice. Another one is keep more than 2 days of food in your pantry and 2 days of water. If the electric grid were hacked and taken down, it might take a week, 10 days, longer if it were a serious attack like an EMP. Keep a little food on supply on hand. We're the only nation that we live in a just-in-time society, but we're the only nation in the world that doesn't have access to food or water beyond just a day or two. If the pumps stop working, what do you, and I'm not talking about being crazy and moving into the basement as a prepper and all of that. And by the way, preppers seem less and less crazy to me all the time, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about keeping a week or 10 days worth of food supply on hand on a regular basis, because if something really did go down, you need to eat. You need to have water. You need a gallon per person per day in the household. And this could happen from Hurricane Sandy. It could happen from Hurricane Katrina. It could happen from flood or fire or a Carrington event, which I cover in the book, which is a natural solar flare that could wipe out our electric grid for a short time at least, and maybe a long time. So practical advice number 2 is keep a little bit of food and a little bit of water on hand.
In the subtitle, you say that this is a coming cyber economic attack. When is it coming?
I don't know, but I can tell you with almost 100% certainty it will come. We get hacked 10 million hacking attempts a day. Everybody in the government, both sides of the political aisle, will tell you we will have a cyber Pearl Harbor at some point. Al-Qaeda has recruited some of the best hackers in the world. The Iranians, the supreme leader of Iran, went down and showed on Fars, the Iranian news network, showed all of the hackers that they're training, and their intention is to attack the United States and the West. Every day there are hacks that happen. In fact, the Syrian Electronic Army in 2013 hacked the Associated Press Twitter feed, sent out a false tweet that the White House had been hit. The algorithmic trading programs of the New York Stock Exchange picked up on it, and immediately the stock exchange dropped 1%. It was totally fake. What if they did that in conjunction with a terror attack? What would happen? We could be down 10% instantly. So the point is, we will face a terror attack. It is inevitable, and we need to prepare for it.
Kevin Freeman's first book was Secret Weapon: How Economic Terrorism Brought Down the U.S. Stock Market and Why It Can Happen Again. His most recent book, brand new out, Game Plan: How to Protect Yourself from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. This is Book TV on C-SPAN 2.